بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد على قدر حبك فيه. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد على قدر عنايتك به. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد حق قدر مقداره. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها أعلى الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة الرضا ورضا عن أصحابه رضا الرضا والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah wa shukrullah. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that we have at this moment and at every moment we're receiving. Alhamdulillah wa shukrullah. And that the blessing to continue our reading of this blessed text, the Jawharat al-Tawheed. And we left off on line 29. حياته كذا الكلام السمع ثم البصر بذي أتانا السمع. So we've been discussing these the sifat al-ma'ani, the affirmative attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we've been discussing their ta'alluqat, their associations. And last class I believe we talked about Kalaam, so the pre-eternal speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our understanding of the Quran, and that if we reflect in general, we can find that the Sunnis were carefully preserving everything that they had inherited from the Salaf. Okay, all of the beliefs that they had inherited from the earliest Muslims, the early generations of Islam, that they were preserving those beliefs while finding a median or a balance between two extremes. That they were avoiding on one side absurdity, logical absurdity, and on the other side denial. So striking this balance of avoiding absurdity and denial, that on one hand, logical absurdities, so any sort of anthropomorphic understanding of the divine, assigning any sort of attributes of creation, human attributes, attributes of time, temporality, change, any sort of change whatsoever, that ascribing this to Allah, assigning it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believing that in a literal sense would be absurd. You run into a logical absurdity where the creator is likened to his creation, and things sort of fall apart logically. And on the other hand, if there are beliefs or understandings of the early generations that do not entail absurdities, then those must be preserved. And so the other extreme that is just as dangerous is denial, flat out denial. And that the very word for disbelief, kufr, is denial. And so denial either of Allah Ta'ala himself or any of his attributes is a major problem. And so I believe last class a question was raised that, why can't we just say that the Quran is a document that Allah sent down for our guidance and not even talk about whether it's speech or not? Why do we have to get into it? Well, because we inherited from the Salaf that the Quran, our mother Aisha, Allah be pleased with her, she said, مَا بَيْنَ دَفَتَيْ الْمُصْحَفِ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ, that everything between the two ends of the Mus'haf is the speech of God. Everything between the two covers of the Mus'haf is the speech of God. And so we believe that the Quran is the speech of God. It is not merely a document of guidance sent down, but it is the speech of God. It is Kalamullah. Now, on one hand, we don't want to fall into an absurdity, which some of the anthropomorphists fell into when they said that if the Quran is Kalamullah, then the letters and the sounds are pre-eternal because Allah is outside of time, and so these letters and sounds have to be outside of time. Well, that obviously is absurd because letters and sounds, there is order, there are in time, they come into existence, come out of existence. You say alif first, and then lam second, and then mim, and then by the time you say lam, the alif does not exist anymore. And then when you say the lam, the subsequent mim does not exist. But when you say mim, then the lam no longer exists. And so you have all of this in time, out of time reality of the letters and sounds that we recite. So surely the very letters and sounds of the Mus'haf cannot be pre-eternal. But then how do we understand then the belief of the Salaf, which was articulated very clearly, explicitly, that the Quran is Kalamullah, and that we believe that it is not something merely something sent down, it is divine speech that has been revealed, which has much more significance with respect to our relationship with Allah, that we recite His words. Well, this goes back, so then on the other extreme was denial. Okay, so on one hand you have absurdity, which we avoid, but on the other hand, the strict rationalists, the extreme rationalists, the Mu'tazili, that where they just said that khalas, it's all created. Everything, God's speech is created. And so this is a type of denial of an attribute, because that if it's attributed to God, Kalamullah, then it's His attribute. And that secondly, if it's created, well then whose speech is it? Because something created by Allah does not mean it is His in that sense. So for example, Allah Ta'ala creates the colors on our clothing. But does that mean that those are Allah's colors? Right? Does that mean that, so when Allah creates blackness, does that mean He is black? When Allah creates brownness, does that mean He is brown? When Allah creates whiteness, does that mean He is white? No, hasha. And so the creation of something does not mean that it is the attribute of the creator. And so the balance that Sunni Islam was able to reach, and in a very careful manner, was that what's the reality of speech? Well, the reality of speech is not necessarily letters and sounds, right? As we discussed last class, that very easy example for us to appreciate is sign language, that you have movements of the limbs of a person, and it's signifying tremendous amount of meaning, right? It's signifying tremendous amount of meaning. And so the reality of speech is not letters. The reality of speech is not script on paper, or sounds that emanate from the mouth, or gestures of the hand. That what's the common denominator of all of these things by which we call them speech is signification of meaning. Is that these are different ways, modes of signifying meaning. And so what the reality of speech is signification. The reality of Kalaam is dalala, is that it signifies meaning. So that there's nothing absurd about ascribing an attribute of signification to the divine. There's nothing absurd logically, there's nothing logically absurd in ascribing an attribute of signification to the divine, a pre-eternal attribute, because if it's the attribute of the divine, then it has to be pre-eternal. And so He subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has the sifa of kalam, He has the attribute of speech. And that attribute is a pre-eternal, it's a pre-eternal attribute ascribed to His essence. That is, its association is one of dalala. Its association is one of dalala. It is an attribute of signification. That is the ma'na. These are called sifatul ma'ani, attributes of meaning. So what's the meaning that we are affirming of Allah when we say that He has the attribute of kalam? Dalala, signification. And that signification is not logically absurd. To have words, letters, sounds, grammar, declension, silence, muteness, all of these are absurdities because they imply temporality and change, occurrence. But pure signification is not absurd. And so we've avoided both absurdity as well as denial. We affirm this meaning that we have inherited from the Salaf without falling into any absurdity. And so it's something to really marvel at what Sunni Islam was able to do in this milieu of dialectic and intellectual challenge. So back to the line 29, hayatuhu kadal kalamu. So we've covered these attributes, his life, likewise his speech. And then Imam Laqani says, rahimahullah, as-sam'u thumma al-basar bidhi atana as-sam'u. So the last two attributes of this sifat al-ma'ani are hearing and sight. Hearing and sight. And then he says, bidhi atana as-sam'u. With these has as-sam' come. So the second word as-sam' refers to revelation. So the first word as-sam' is the attribute of hearing. The second word as-sam' at the end of the line refers to revelation, i.e. ad-dalil as-sam'i, the proof based off of revelation, which is as opposed to ad-dalil al-aqli, rational proof, because those are the two types of proofs in this enterprise of al-aql wa naql, reason and revelation. And so as-sam' here is a synonym for naql, what's been revealed to us, what we use as proofs from the revelation. So this in balagha is called jinas tam, using the same word with two different meanings, right? Because it's not considered good Arabic to use the same word with the same meaning. But here, as-sam' has two completely different meanings, and so it's actually very eloquent. It's called a jinas tam. It's a complete jinas. So as-sam' and basar. So these are attributes of inkishaaf. Okay, these are attributes of inkishaaf, which is, for the it's difficult to translate. Inkishaaf, revealed. Someone help me with inkishaaf. Disclosure. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Disclosure. Bismillah. So anything, again, we have to avoid both absurdity and denial. So any sort of understanding of these attributes that would relate to creation, such as sound waves, vibration of parts, like I was in the doctor's office recently just to check something with my hearing, alhamdulillah, and he had the diagram of what goes on for sound. So there's waves, and then there's a little bone, what's it called? The bone that vibrates in the middle ear. That starts with an M. Yeah, there's three of them. So there's a tiny bone that when sound waves hit it, it vibrates, and then it sends these vibrations to this fluid, and there's like a basilar membrane with tiny little hair follicles, and then the hair follicles, they vibrate based off of the vibrations of the sound waves that come in, and then their vibrations are they are directly connected to nerve fibers. And so they basically tap these nerve fibers, which start shooting signals, and then it crosses over. What's the cranial nerve? Eighth. What's it called? Auditory. So the auditory nerve, and it crosses over to the other side, the cerebral cortex, which then perceives sound, the sound that we perceive. And that's the mechanism by which we hear. And so all of that obviously is inconceivable for the divine, right? All of that is certainly in time and dependent. And what we believe is that every single movement and stillness of that bone and all those hair follicles and all of those action potentials is created by Allah. Hada khalqullah, that Allah Ta'ala is creating all of those movements and stillnesses, and then He creates the perception that we have of sound when when we understand that sound. So that with sight, with hearing, all of the in-time dependent mechanisms of these realities for us are certainly inconceivable for the divine. But what is conceivable and what we affirm is simply inkishaaf, it's a type of disclosure. And we can't understand the reality of it, but it's a type of disclosure. Okay, that Allah Ta'ala has sama, He has hearing, which is a type of disclosure, pre-eternal disclosure that He has. And basar is a pre-eternal disclosure that's called sight. And again, with nothing to do with temporality or change. And that the inkishaaf of sama is different and unique from the inkishaaf of basar, which is different and unique from the inkishaaf of ilm. So the disclosure of hearing is different and unique from the disclosure of, so the disclosure of divine hearing is different and unique from the disclosure of divine sight, which is different and unique from the disclosure of divine knowledge. Okay, so we don't believe that they are all one and the same. They are unique individual attributes, and that each one is a perfect disclosure. So the inkishaaf, the disclosure of sama, is perfect. It is not in need of the inkishaaf of basar to complete it. Such as with us, you know, there could be a sound behind me. So for me, and Allah is exalted above any analogy, but just as taqreeb, so that we can sort of approximate a better understanding. With creation, we are limited, so I hear a sound behind me. There's a partial inkishaaf, a partial disclosure through that sound, but I don't really know the reality of that thing. And so then I turn around and I see it, and so there's more of a disclosure. So the disclosure that I had from hearing is enhanced by the disclosure I have from sight. And then I investigate that thing and I come to learn about it. And so then there's even a further disclosure of knowledge, whereas my knowledge of that thing grows. So the inkishaaf of our senses and our knowledge is limited and dependent on other senses and other means of enhancement, whereas of course with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, each disclosure, each inkishaaf is in and of itself perfect and complete and without need of anything. And so it's inconceivable for there to be greater hearing for Allah or less hearing for Allah, or greater sight or less sight, or greater knowledge or less knowledge. It's all infinite and perfect, and these are His attributes. And that the ta'alluqat, the associations of hearing and sight, are with all that exist. Okay, they say the ta'alluq, the association of Allah's hearing and sight is with al-mawjudat, all that exists. Okay, so if it exists, Allah Ta'ala hears it and sees it. If it exists, Allah Ta'ala hears it and sees it. Whatever exists, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears it and sees it. And in terms of the suluhi, tanjizi, what we discussed before with the other attributes, that with respect, so al-mawjudat, the existent, those things which exist, all that exists, includes Allah and His attributes, what exists necessarily, and then creation, what exists possibly. So with respect to Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala, His hearing and sight, the association is tanjizi qadim. It is pre-eternal and actual. Okay, because He is pre-eternal. And so His hearing and sight of Himself was actual in pre-eternity. With respect to us, creation, before we existed, so in pre-eternity, it was suluhi qadim. It was pre-eternal, the association was pre-eternal, but potential, because we had yet to exist. And that after we exist here, now, in time, in the cosmos, it is tanjizi hadith. The association of His hearing and sight with us when we exist is actual and in time, because we are in time. So this is something that we discussed with the other attributes. And with respect to Kalaam, we forgot to mention with Kalaam, the associations, that it's an association of dalala, we said, signification. Allah Ta'ala signifies all the wajibat, the jaizat, and the mustahilat. Allah Ta'ala signifies all that is necessarily existent, that is possibly existent, and that is inconceivable to exist. He indicates all of that. So just as He knows all of that, He indicates all of that. He knows the wajibat, the jaizat, the mustahilat. He knows what is all that is necessary, possible, and impossible. And as well, He indicates all that is necessary, possible, and impossible. In terms of the association, then, that it's all tanjizi qadim. The association of His kalam is tanjizi qadim, that in pre-eternity, actual indication. In pre-eternity, actual indication. Okay? So, complete, total, timeless indication of everything necessary, everything possible, and everything impossible. The only consideration that they mention, which is not of an association of kalam that is not actual pre-eternal, is with respect to commands and prohibitions to us. With respect to commands and prohibitions to us. So with respect to commands and prohibitions to us, in pre-eternity, before we existed, it was saluhi qadim. It was potential pre-eternal, that Allah Ta'ala could indicate that in pre-eternity any command or prohibition for creation, but creation did not exist. And then in time, in the world, it is tanjizi hadith, that Allah Ta'ala actually indicates the commands and prohibitions, and the association is in time, because we are in time, the recipients of the commands and prohibitions. We are in time. So, alhamdulillah. Does that make sense? Bismillah. Inshallah, review your notes, write it down, make a chart, and inshallah, you'll come to an appreciation and a marvel at how, because the philosophers, to this day, they have a big problem with this, is how does the pre-eternal relate to creation, created things? Where is that nexus? Where is that meeting point between the timeless and the timed? Our minds can't we can't understand that. And there's no better way to articulate it than what we have conveyed from our theologians. It's the ta'alluqat. It's through these associations between pre-eternal divine attributes and all else. No.
So maybe it's kind of related to this what you were just saying. Maybe probably not. So with the ta'alluqat and the saluhi qadim versus tanjizi hadith, the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are pre-eternal and obviously unchanging. And then when I hear that something's saluhi qadim, and then when something got created now, it's tanjizi hadith, that's the ta'alluq, not the sifa itself, but I don't know, somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a very important distinction. Jazakumullah khair. When we talk about saluhi and tanjizi, potential and actual, right? There's a difference between potential and actual. That's a type of change. What we're referring to is not the attribute. It's the association of the attribute. The attributes are timeless. The attributes are divine attributes. They are ascribed to the divine entity, Allah Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He and His attributes are timeless. There's no change with Allah Ta'ala with respect to His entity and attributes. But you do have effects that exist that reflect change. So for example, there was a time when none of us existed. And here we are, sitting, speaking, listening, reflecting, thinking, daydreaming, feeling tired. Some of us might be feeling various feelings. So there is change in the world. Now, we believe that who's responsible for all change? Who creates everything? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do we relate, how do we understand the timeless divine with timeless attributes, but then in time changes and effects? Is through ta'alluqat. These associations there is variation with associations. That the attributes of Allah ta'ala, that there are pre-eternal associations and there are temporal associations. And this actually segues into, we could just talk about it now, what we were going to discuss, is one of the issues that the Asharis and Maturidis disagreed on, which is the attribute of, does anyone know? What attribute? The one attribute that the Asharis and Maturidis, it's both Sunni Islam, and they're basically the same madhab, but there are subtle differences. What's the one attribute, divine attribute, that they disagreed on? Takween, which means kawwana, to make something ka'in, existentiation. Okay, existentiation, to make something exist. That the Maturidis considered this an 8th affirmative attribute. Okay, so up till now we've been saying that there are 7 affirmative attributes: knowledge, will, power, life, hearing, sight, speech. That's according to both the Asharis and Maturidis. But the Maturidis did add an 8th one, which is takween, existentiation, or creation. So what they said was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a pre-eternal attribute of takween, because He was always khaliq, and He was always raziq, He was always creator, and He was always sustainer, and He was always the one that gives life, and He was always the one that gives death, and He was always His names and attributes, which inshallah it's coming very soon in the text. So takween, that is the way that they understood that, is that Allah Ta'ala has a pre-eternal attribute of creation, and when it's directed to creating things in the world, it's called takhliq or khalq. When it's related to providing sustenance, it's called tarziq. When it's related to creating life, it's called ihya. When it's related to creating death, it's called imata, etc., etc. So the variegation of the world and all of the change in the world went back to this attribute of takween, according to the Maturidis. The Ashari said that all of that, in reality, there's no 8th essential affirmative attribute called takween. In reality, all that the Maturidis called takween, the Ashari said it's the ta'alluq of qudra. It's the association of divine power. That Allah Ta'ala's divine power, when it associates with that which Allah wills to create, or give sustenance to, or create life in, or create death in, etc., etc., it's an association that is tanjizi hadith, in time, actual, and that's the variegation of, that's the basis of the variety in the world, all of the changes and occurrences in the world. So it's not a crucial difference, because you can appreciate that both Asharis and Maturidis agree that Allah Ta'ala, His names and attributes, He that they are pre-eternal, okay, and that He was always Khaliq. It's not that when He created creation, He acquired the name Khaliq. It's not that when He created creation and was the Rabb of creation, He acquired the name Rabb. No, He was always Khaliq, even though there was no Makhluq. He was always Rabb, even though there was no Marboob. He was always the creator and sustainer, even before there was the created and the sustained. Okay, that's agreed upon, and they both agree that there's variety in the world, and that has to be explained, accounted for. The Maturidis accounted for it by way of this 8th attribute that they affirmed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, existentiation. Whereas the Ashari said it goes back to qudra, it goes back to divine power. And the ta'alluq of divine power that's in time it has variegation. I don't know if that helps. Inshallah. طيب. Okay, بِذِي أَتَانَا السَّمْعُ. With this did the revelation come. And this specifically, obviously revelation came with all of these attributes, the names of Allah Ta'ala that from which these attributes are derived. Al-Alim, وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ إِلَّا إِنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ مَشِيئَةً الحي القيوم حياة وهو السميع البصير سمع and basar, and then وكلم الله موسى تكليما, Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam. So they're all in revelation, from which these attributes, the names from which these attributes are derived. But this specifically is dealing with Kalaam, Sama, and Basar, because as we said last time, that of these 7 affirmative attributes, 4 are presupposed by the miracle. Okay, there's 4 that are presupposed by the miracle, so therefore they have to be proven rationally to get out of circular reasoning. We said that last time. Whereas Kalaam, Sama, and Basar, for a miracle to appear at the hand of a prophet, alayhi salam jami'an, that this would not necessarily logically entail that the producer of the miracle was speaking, hearing, and seeing, according to some. So many felt that the stronger proof for these 3 attributes of speech, hearing, and sight was based off revelation. Revelation said it, so we believe it, we affirm it. Others said no, there is a strong logical proof, which is the fact that if these attributes were denied of the divine, then deficiencies would be ascribed to him, because the lack of speech is muteness, the lack of hearing is deafness, the lack of sight is blindness, and these are deficiencies. And so there's a bit of discussion as to whether these are affirmed primarily logically or primarily by revelation. And so he says, بِذِي أَتَانَا السَّمْعُ, that revelation has affirmed these. Okay, so then line 30. فَهَلْ لَهُ إِدْرَاكٌ أَوْ لَا خُلْفُ وَعِنْدَ قَوْمٍ صَحَّ فِيهِ الْوَقْفُ. So I'm going to need a little more osmosis after this, inshallah. It's very interesting dialectic when you get into it's a very sophisticated theology, and when you read more of the literature, it's very fascinating. For those that are really into sort of logical dialectic type of, like we talked about the attribute of takween. So the Asharis would ask the Maturidis, if all of this, if all of the existent things in the world go back to takween, an attribute of creation, existentiation, making things exist, then what's the point of qudra? What does power relate to then? Because the Ashari say all that exists goes back to what? Which attribute? The attribute of qudra, power. It's the attribute of ijad, of existentiation. So the Asharis would ask the Maturidis this, and the Maturidis would say that that qudra, takween, is the attribute by which Allah Ta'ala makes something exist in reality, brings it into existence. Whereas qudra is the attribute by which Allah prepares that thing to exist. It's a preparatory. And then they said, the Ashari said, things are already prepared to exist, because we said that everything, what's the attribute of qudra associated with? No, that's the meaning, but what's the association to what things? All things that are not existent. For qudra, possible. All things possible. And we said an example of a thing possible is like a scale of, on one side is existence, other side non-existence, and it's balanced. So you need a mukhassis or a murajjih, something to tip the scale, right? This is what we talked about when we did the proofs of these. And so the Asharis responded, well, the mere fact that it's a scale, it's mumkin, it's rationally possible to exist, it means that it's prepared. So what would qudra do? And the Maturidis would say, well, there's a difference between the imkan and the isti'adad. There's a difference between just the mere logical possibility of existing and the real preparation to exist. And so they say the qudra gives it a type of, it makes it ready to receive takween, ready to receive existence, being brought into existence. So I find that really interesting. Alhamdulillah. طيب. So, and some of the later Maturidis actually said that they felt the Asharis were closer on this one. And one of the examples they give is in the Tahawiyah, when Imam Tahawi says that Allah Ta'ala was khaliq bila makhluq, razik bila marzuq, that He was creator before there was anything created. He was sustainer before there was anything to be sustained. He was Rabb before there was the marboob. He was the maintainer before there was the thing maintained. At the end of that discussion, Imam Tahawi says, وَذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And the reason for this is because He is over everything qadir. So he brings it back to qudra in that text. And this is what he took from Abu Hanifa and his two students, rahimahullah jami'an. And so that whole discussion went back to qudra. And so some of the later Maturidis said the Asharis were actually closer on this one. Wallahu a'lam. And there's only 6 differences that Imam Tajuddin Subki, he reduced the differences between the Asharis and Maturidis to only 6. And they're not significant such that these two should be considered two separate schools, that they're so that some of them are theoretical, they're not practical, to the extent that they're really just one school. And so that's why when Sunni Islam sort of consolidated, the madhahib consolidated, these were seen as one school. So now idrak. Idrak it's difficult to translate. Perhaps you could translate it as perception. And this is in line 30, that فَهَلْ لَهُ إِدْرَاكٌ أَوْ لَا, that does Allah Ta'ala have another affirmative attribute called idrak? أَوْ لَا, or does He not? خُلْفُ, there is ikhtilaf on this. There is difference of opinion on this amongst the Sunni theologians. وَعِنْدَ قَوْمٍ, and according to some theologians, صَحَّ فِي الْوَقْفُ, it's most appropriate to just say Allahu A'lam, to suspend judgment. Okay, so with respect to Allah's qudra, irada, ilm, His knowledge, will, power, etc., we don't suspend judgment. Suspending judgment would be kufr. Or, suspending judgment whether Allah is all-powerful would be kufr. Suspending judgment whether Allah has an attribute of power would be a bid'ah. So, but with respect to this attribute, idrak, it's a valid position to just suspend judgment, because it was not explicitly mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah. And so many theologians felt that this is the most correct approach. But just to give an explanation that what exactly was being discussed is that some theologians felt that Allah Ta'ala had this another attribute of affirmative attribute, sifatul ma'na, that a pre-eternal attribute ascribed to His entity, subhanahu wa ta'ala, called idrak, perception. That by means of this attribute, Allah Ta'ala perceived things that we touch, things that can be touched, palpable things, or things that can be smelled, or things that can be tasted. Okay, So with respect to in humans, the other three of the five senses, that for those things, is there a unique attribute that perceives those things? Okay. Now, obviously, without anything related to creation, without any analogy with creation, so without taste buds and without, the follicles that allow us to smell, or the sensory nerves that allow us to feel things. Without any of that, is there, so transcendent above all of that, an attribute of perception by which Allah Ta'ala perceives the things in the world that we taste, smell, or touch. And the reasoning was that if we say that speech, hearing, and sight is affirmed primarily by reason, okay, what was the rational argument for those three attributes? Yeah, without reductio ad absurdum. If you were to deny those, then there's deficiency ascribed to the divine. So they said, by the same logic, perception, that to deny the perception, because if in creation, and Allah is exalted above creation, but if in creation someone is unable to perceive things touched, or perceive scent, or perceive taste, then that's a deficiency that they have. And so while Allah is transcendent above creation and there's no resemblance between Him and creation, if the divine were not able to perceive those things, then that would be a type of deficiency. So by the same logic of that we affirm the attributes of speech, hearing, and sight, those theologians that affirmed Idraak did so. And it includes, for example, Imam Qadi Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, right, the great Ashari student of the student Imam Ashari, the great master of Kalaam. Those that denied it said, they said that logically you cannot separate logically you cannot separate the means by which we do those things, the means by which we perceive, with the perception. This is what they said. Logically, you cannot separate the means by which we perceive palpable things and smell and taste with the perception itself. They said logically they're bound. And so this attribute cannot be affirmed, because certainly the means by which we perceive is absurd for the divine. Does that make sense? Okay. So they said that the relationship between the means by which we perceive things felt and things smelled and things tasted, it's logically bound. It's a logical necessity to have those means for perception itself. And so they said that because the means is inconceivable, the effect is inconceivable. But those that affirmed the attribute of Idraak said it's not a logical necessity. Okay, that it's just a necessity based off of the ada, based off of the way Allah has created us. And so they affirmed it. And again, those that denied it, their approach to they also felt that the attributes of speech, hearing, and sight were affirmed primarily by revelation, not by logic. Okay. They said that those that denied Idraak, they said that the means by which we affirmed hearing, sight, and speech is not by logic, it was by revelation. And so revelation did not mention Idraak, and so therefore we do not affirm Idraak. Whereas those that affirmed Idraak said the proof for hearing, sight, and speech is what? Rational. And so therefore the same reasoning applies for Idraak. No. But as Imam Bajuri says, it's safest to just suspend judgment. And so that's what we will leave with. And I'm sure most of you agree. So to continue in the text. So now we understand that line. فَهَلْ لَوْ إِدْرَاكٌ, does he have an attribute called idrak? أو لا, or not? خُلْفُ, there's اختلاف, there's difference of opinion. وَعِنْدَ قَوْمٍ, and according to many masters, صَحَّ فِي الْوَقْفُ, it's most appropriate to simply suspend judgment. 31. حَيٌّ عَلِيمٌ قَادِرٌ مُرِيدٌ سَمِعْ بَصِيرٌ مَا يَشَاءُ يُرِيدُ. Okay, so now, according to many commentators, he is now mentioning the fourth category of attributes, which are the as-sifat al-ma'nawiyya. So those attributes related to the affirmative attributes. And these are what are undeniable. Okay, so that Allah being alive, Allah being all-hearing, Allah being all-seeing, Allah being a speaker, Allah Ta'ala being a knower, Allah Ta'ala being so omniscient and omnipotent, and His being a one who wills. That, so predicating those attributes, the predication of those attributes to the divine is undeniable. But the difference came between the Sunnis and the Mu'tazilis as to whether does Allah know and see, and does Allah know and will and create by attributes or by His essence. And so we affirmed the attributes, and now we conclude with the attributes of that are agreed upon. Okay, because the Mu'tazilis agreed with this, they just simply said it's by His essence. So Allah is living, hayyun. Allah is alim, all-knowing. Allah is qadir. Allah is murid. He is omnipotent and willing. Allah is sami', which is sami', but for the poetic meter, sami'. Hearing, basir, all-seeing, ma yasha yuridu, all that He wills, He chooses. Whatever He wills, He chooses. And there's a story they mention here of a linguist called Ibn al-Shajari. Ibn al-Shajari was a linguist who he used to teach a halaqah and of the Arabic language, and he always used to, in his dars, he always used to mention the ayah, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ, in Surah Ar-Rahman, that kulla yawmin, at every moment, huwa fi sha'n, Allah is engaged in a matter. And sha'n in that verse is nakira, it's indefinite. And often in the Quran, an-nakira lit-ta'zim, that the indefinite is used for something immense, something important. So at every moment, Allah is engaged in a tremendous matter. At every moment, Allah is engaged in a tremendous matter indeed. And so that one day, a stranger came to the dars and said, "Ma sha'nu rabbika al-yawm?" What matter is your Lord engaged in right now? And Ibn al-Shajari, he put his head down, and he was bewildered by how profound that question was. What is the matter in which your Lord is engaged in at this moment right now? And so he was so stunned by how profound the question was, he simply got up and left with his head down, bowed down. And then that night he had a dream in which the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, came to him. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the dream that as-sa'il laka Khidr. He said, the one asking you is Khidr, right? Alayhi salam, the mysterious saint or prophet that Allah Ta'ala refers to as a tremendous, tremendous person in Surah Al-Kahf that Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was sent to learn from. And so he said that when he comes to you tomorrow with that question, tell him the answer. شُؤُونٌ يُبْدِيهَا وَلَا يَبْتَدِيهَا يَرْفَعُ أَقْوَامًا وَيَخْفِضُ آخَرِينَ. Great, tremendous matters that Allah unfolds, yubdiha, He manifests what He had decided in pre-eternity. La yabtadiha, it's not that He is deciding at each moment, right? Because it's based off of, every matter in every moment is really an unfolding of what Allah decided in pre-eternity. So shu'unun yubdiha, matters, tremendous matters that He manifests. La yabtadiha, He's not deciding to initiating in His decision at each moment. Yarfa'u aqwaman wa yakhfidu akharin, He raises certain people and He lowers others. He raises certain people and He lowers others. And that if we reflect on the reality of everything that Allah creates, it's either people getting close to Him or getting more distant from Him. That at every moment, certain people are drawing nearer to their Lord. And at every moment, and those same moments, others are falling and being forsaken further and further from their Lord. And that Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, Karamallahu Wajh, that he's reported to have said that if you're not in ziyada, you're in nuqsan. That if you are not in a state of increase, then you are in a state of decrease. Because there's no just, neutral state. It's either drawing near to Allah or falling behind. And so the next day he went, and the same stranger came, Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salam came and asked him the question, and he gave the answer that the Prophet taught him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Sayyidina Khidr said, Salli ala man allamak. Send salawat on the one that taught you that. And he took off real fast. So, ma yasha yuridu. Whatever Allah wills, He chooses. Khalas. It's already done, in a sense, right? We're just going through the motions of what's written on an amazing tablet. Yeah. 32, mutakallimun, with the sukoon on the ta because of the meter. Speaker. Thumma sifatu dhati, and to proceed. Thumma here, to proceed. Sifatu dhati laysat bighayri aw bi'ayn dhati. And we discussed this in detail. This really resolved, again, a Sunni, the sort of median balanced position of Sunni Islam between two extremes. That these pre-eternal attributes are neither ghayr dhat nor ayn dhat. They are neither the entity itself, ayn dhat, nor are, because obviously, otherwise how do you predicate? How do you say that Allah is all-knowing? If all-knowing is Allah, is the same as Allah in meaning, right? Obviously the mafhum, what's understood from the entity, is different from what's understood from an attribute of that entity. And so that's why we're able to predicate attributes onto subjects. So laysat bi'ayn dhat, they're not the entity itself. وَلَيْسَتْ بِغَيْرِ ذَاتٍ, and they are not other than the entity, other meaning separable. Other meaning separable. And this is the response to the charge, the Mu'tazili charge, that by affirming pre-eternal attributes, O Sunnis, you have fell into a type of polytheism. They said by affirming pre-eternal attributes, you have fallen into a type of multiplicity, a multiple, you believe in a type of polytheism because there's multiplicity in pre-eternity. Whereas we say, no, polytheism is when you affirm multiple entities. Polytheism is when you affirm multiple entities, but we're affirming one entity with multiple attributes, and that's not polytheism. And these attributes are not separable from the entity. If they were separable, you have a problem, which is what some of the Christians said, as we discussed earlier. فَقُدْرَةٌ بِمُمْكِنٍ تَعَلَّقَتْ. So this is now, alhamdulillah, we've covered this. Divine power is associated, ta'allaqat, bimumkinin, with everything possible. We discussed this. Bila tanahi ma bihi ta'allaqat, without any limit or end of what it is associated with. Meaning that the potential things that Allah could create are infinite. Okay, so this ta'alluq that there's no tanahi, that there's no end or limit, refers to the ta'alluq that is suluhi qadim, the potential pre-eternal association. Because obviously the tanjizi hadith, the actual in-time association of qudra, is limited because we are finite. This cosmos is finite. Okay, but the potential of what Allah could create, that Allah could create a second Abbas that's a little taller, and then a third Abbas that's a little taller, and then a fourth Abbas that's a little taller. That could go on ad infinitum. So the potential that Allah could create is infinite. And similarly, paradise and hell, and the pleasures of paradise and the tortures of hell are without end, because at every moment Allah recreates into, everlasting. 34, وَوَحْدَةً أَوْجِبْ لَهَا, and believe that the attribute of qudra is one. Believe that the attribute of qudra is one. وَمِثْلُ ذِي إِرَادَةٌ, likewise is irada. Okay, likewise that it's associated with what? All things? Irada associated with all things? Possible. MashaAllah. And that the possibilities that Allah could choose are also infinite. and that the attribute of irada is also one. So there's three things he's affirming here. He's saying rahimahullah, that qudra and irada are associated with all things possible, that the things that are potentially possible are infinite, and that each of these attributes is one. There's not a second qudra or a third qudra. There's not a second irada or a third irada. Then he says, وَالْعِلْمُ لَكِنْ عَمَّدِي, and also knowledge, okay? However, the association of knowledge is broader. How is it broader? Because the association of knowledge is not only what's mumkin, but also what's wajib and mustahil, which we discussed. And so that's why in the next line, 35, وَعَمَّ أَيْضًا, how is it more general? How is it broader? Because it also incorporates wajiban wal mumtani', what's logically necessary and what's logically inconceivable. And so it's broader in that sense. The ta'alluqat is broader. The attributes, no attribute is broader than another, but the associations are broader. So وَمِثْلُ ذَا كَلَامُهُ, and likewise is his speech, because also divine speech is associated with what? The same three categories. Wajibat, necessities; mumkinat, possibilities; mustahilat, inconceivabilities, impossibilities. فَلْنَتَّبِعْ, so let us wholeheartedly follow. Right? Let us wholeheartedly follow. Ittaba'a is different from taba'a. Taba'a, form one, is just to follow. Someone takes you one way and you just go down there. But ittaba'a, there's a shadda, it's form 8. There's a strength in the word. Ittaba'a, right? The shadda is shidda. So the strength meaning follow all the way, wholeheartedly, and it's going to take some effort to follow because this material is very heavy. And so it's going to take some effort to really grasp it and the osmosis that was spoken of earlier before we can follow. So Imam Laqani says, فَلْنَتَّبِعْ. So bismillah, let's roll up our sleeves and do this. وَكُلُّ مَوْجُودٍ أَنِتْ لِلسَّمْعِ بِي كَذَا الْبَصَرِ إِدْرَاكُهُ إِنْ قِيلَ بِي. And then with respect to hearing, sight, and perception, if it's affirmed, what are they associated with? Mawjudat, all that exists. So he says, وَكُلُّ مَوْجُودٍ, and everything that exists, أَنِتْ لِلسَّمْعِ بِهِ, that associate, affirm the association of hearing to it, every mawjud. كَذَا الْبَصَرِ, likewise sight, إِدْرَاكُهُ إِنْ قِيلَ بِي, perception, if it is affirmed. وَغَيْرُ عِلْمٍ, 37, وَغَيْرُ عِلْمٍ هَذِهِ كَمَا ثَبَتْ, and these attributes are different from knowledge, as was articulated, because we said that the Inkishaaf, remember, the disclosure of each is unique and independent and complete, and so it's different from knowledge. So he says, وَغَيْرُ عِلْمٍ هَذِهِ, these are different from knowledge. Some hearing, the divine hearing is different from the divine knowledge. The divine sight is different from the divine knowledge. Divine perception, if it's affirmed, is different from divine knowledge. ثُمَّ الْحَيَاةُ مَا بِشَيْءٍ تَعَلَّقَتْ. And to proceed, lastly, to conclude this discussion, life is not associated with anything because it's an intrinsic attribute, if you will. It's an intrinsic attribute, if you will. Are we supposed to do Q&A now? Yeah, bismillah. Sorry, it's heavy, but it's the ilahiyat. This is the most difficult section in the text, and inshallah, it just gets easier. But any questions? No.
On the question of the attribute of qudra,
Bismillah.
so if it's established by rational proof, then many of those have affirmed it. The preference of the author is, suspending opinion on it, which seems like the path that you prefer as well. But I was wondering, even if you look at it from divine text, isn't there that yudrikul absar wa huwa yudrikul absar, which suggests
MashaAllah. A very good question. That textually, لا تدرك الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار, that the eyes cannot perceive him, but he perceives all sight. So, yeah, that's a very good question. I haven't seen that verse being used, because it seems that whenever they mention this discussion, that both sides agreed that this has not been explicitly mentioned in the text. So perhaps they do a ta'wil of what that means, that it's not the same perception that's being discussed here, because this perception has to do with things tasted, things smelled, and things felt, whereas the ayah is yudrikul absar. Wallahu alam though. I don't know. That's a very good question. Yeah.
As we talk about some attributes, go back to other ones theologically speaking, like Rahma is from Irada. What would light be? His attribute of his name, light. Like, what's that related to?
That's a good question. So we said that, what about the 99 names and attributes? And in fact, inshallah, the next class that's where we left off, because we finished line 37. Line 38 talks about the names and attributes. So inshallah, next class we'll start there. That the 99 are mentioned explicitly in the hadith, but they're actually many more than the 99. And we said that they all go back to these 7 affirmative attributes, okay, or different perspectives but essentially back to these 7 affirmative attributes, or his entity itself, subhanahu wa ta'ala, like al-haq, the absolute abidingly real, goes back to his entity, because he's wajibul wujud, he is necessarily existent, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the question was, what about the attribute of light, that Allah ta'ala, he is an-nur, one of his names, and that the ayah says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, Allah is the light of the heavens and earth. So most mufassirin, they say nur huna bima'na munawwir. They say that when Allah ta'ala says Allah is the light of the heavens and earth, what it means is Allah is the illuminator, the munawwir, that's the meaning of nur. And so any light that exists in the cosmos, Allah is the one that creates it. So it goes back to what? Qudra, that he creates light. He creates light. And one of the scholars, he said that al-kawn kulluha dhulma, the entire cosmos is darkness. Wa innama anarahu wujudul haqqi fihi, the only thing that gives it light is the existence of the truth, the abidingly real, right? That Allah is the only basis of light. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Otherwise, this world is dark, because it entices us. The outward of it is enticing and distracting from the remembrance of Allah. And then another scholar came later, and he said he had a different view of it. He said, Al-kawn kulluha nur. He said, actually, the cosmos is all light. Wa innama adlamahu wujudun nafs fihi. The only thing that causes darkness is the existence of the ego therein. Because if it weren't for the ego, everything is light. Because the reality of this cosmos is positive. It indicates. It's all ayat pointing to Allah Ta'ala. And so it's all nur. But it's when I am around, and I have my rights, and I think this, and I don't disagree, and I don't want to, and may Allah forgive the I, that's where all the problem comes into play, right? And that's when all the problems come. So that's the source of darkness in the world. That one of them said, La tukhasim li nafsik. One of them said, don't ever be an advocate for the I inside of you. La tukhasim li nafsik. Don't ever be an advocate for the I inside of. فَإِنَّهَا لَيْسَتْ لَكَ, because it doesn't belong to you. دَعْهَا لِمَالِكِهَا. Just leave it to its master. All right. The I belongs to Allah. So khalas. And if we entrust our affair to Allah, He'll advocate much better than we can. We don't say, obviously, take the means. If someone's oppressing you, then take the means to alleviate that situation. But in general, people bother each other. get on their nerves, and just leave it to Allah. Inshallah, Allah will fix it much better than our anger and our... Any other questions? Bismillah. Alaikum salam.
What would you put belief at? Belief, I mean, what category? Disbelief and belief. What category would you put that at?
So, you mean what attribute does it relate to? So yeah, I mean that's a very... So the question was belief and disbelief in the world. What attribute relates to that? I mean, obviously we choose to believe or disbelieve, right? So, but that's one of the mysteries, is that everything was determined. Allah had willed it in pre-eternity, and Allah creates it accordingly. And so we choose our belief, and some people choose disbelief, but it was already written, which goes back to His will, knowledge and will, and it is created by God, which goes back to His power. But that doesn't deny our choice, and that the mystery of that is something we can't understand.
I have a reason for asking. I have a book that I'm reading called Ethics of Islam. And in this book, the Sheikh talks about Muslims adapting to other practices from other people, such as Easter, other Easter eggs, other Thanksgiving. So I find myself, I was born and raised in this country, I served in this country, but I find myself having not anger, but like upset at some of these holidays that come along, especially this time of year. Like the Sheikh, he said, when you go to practice and what they go to practice, you're in a state of disbelief. So I know many scholars have different opinions, but I go with his opinion. I do. You go to practice and what these people practice, you're in a state of disbelief. If it's not on the Islamic hadith and the Sunnah,
Yeah.
deal with it.
Right. Yeah.
I practiced it many years.
Right.
This was stressful times for me.
Right. Right.
Kid. Many times I went to the store and looked at something I wanted that my mother couldn't give me.
Right.
So me becoming a Muslim and studying what I studied, it was like a big old burden lifted off me.
Right. Alhamdulillah.
I give thanks 5 times a day. I don't give it once a year.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
So that's the reason I asked you that. Where did that come?
Yeah.
Category came in.
Right. Right. Yeah. Barakallahu feekum. But putting aside the fiqh differences of whether we celebrate those holidays or not, it's just important to remember that, because there are certain hadith that if a person imitates a disbeliever, that he's in that state, or if a person is committing a certain sin, that he's in a state of disbelief. The way we interpret those ahadith is not that they're literally a disbeliever, it's that they're emulating those people, but they're still our Muslim brothers and sisters. Yeah. Yeah, it's a imitation, but that's not the reality, because faith is in the heart. Naam. Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam.
Why do we separate that from knowledge? Why can't we conceive that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is infinite knowledge, is perfect knowledge? That He sees, that He knows the smell, He doesn't need.
Right. So that's basically the second opinion. That's exactly what they would say. That they would say, why are we affirming? And it's not, I don't know if it's best to translate it as, does Allah taste and smell, but does Allah perceive things that are tasted Does Allah perceive things that are smelled? Does Allah perceive things that are felt? Right? That's just a small nuance. But that the position of those that said this is not an attribute of the divine is exactly what you said, is that Allah has pre-eternal knowledge, which is all-encompassing. And so He knows the taste of everything, and He knows the feel of everything, and He knows the scent of the smell of everything. And so there's no basis of affirming that. Revelation hasn't come with it. And so they said that does not exist. There's no attribute of perception. The ones that said there is, they were going with the same logical reasoning as they did with hearing, sight, and speech. Because the logical proof of that is that without that, there's a type of deficiency, you know. Because to not be able to speak, to not be able to hear, to not be able to see, to not be able to perceive. This is their line of reasoning. And to be fair, the later theologians of the Ashari school, like Imam Sawi and others, that they say that the logical proof for hearing, sight, and speech is it's not as demonstrative as the other proofs. Okay, and that's why they said that the real proof for those is revelation. The real proof for Allah's hearing, sight, and speech is that Allah has revealed, it's in the Quran explicitly. Because the logical proof, there is some problem in that logical proof. One could say that what's a deficiency for us is not a deficiency for the divine. Okay, and that's what they said, is that that's why that logical proof has some issues, and so we affirm hearing, speech, and sight primarily based off of revelation. And therefore, if the strongest proof for those attributes is revelation, we don't affirm perception, because revelation did not come with it. So this is the dialectic between, and that's why Imam Laqani says, هَلْ لَهُ إِدْرَاكٌ أَوْ لَا خُلْفُ. Does he have idrak or no? There's a khilaf. وَإِنَّ الْقَوْمٍ سَحَّ فِيهِ الْوَقْفُ, and it's best, according to some, just to suspend judgment. You know, but if someone inclines towards either, if someone inclines to the position that Allah does not have idrak, that's a valid position to take, because this is a dialectic within the Sunni tradition.
And why do we say that these are also? Do we also separate out the fact that speech, hearing, and sight are separate from knowledge just because they're revealed as such?
Exactly. Why do we affirm hearing, sight, and speech as separate from knowledge? Because they are explicitly mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, and linguistically their meanings are unique and from one another. Yeah, and so we are. It's very clear that they're different from knowledge.
And then we talked about how we relate to it. We talked about them being Tanjizi Qadid, but Tanjizi habit.
Not them, but their associations.
I mean, I don't understand why we don't say Tanjizi Qadid, because in his pre-eternal knowledge, he knew like what one would say even before it was said, right? Or he spoke. It's timeless. It has meaning.
What are you asking about? Which attribute?
I think it was Kalaam when you said.
So for Kalaam, I said the association is Tanjizi Qadim. That's what I said.
Or there was
But there is also an association of Suluhi Qadim and an association of Tanjizi Hadith. So that, so the attribute of Kalaam, the association is, there's one association that's Tanjizi Qadim, pre-eternal actual, which is his signification of everything he knows. Okay, which is his signification of everything that he knows. Whatever he knows of the wajibat, jaizat, mustahilat, he signifies, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. But the reason why they mentioned those other two associations of Suluhi Qadim, potential pre-eternal, and Tanjizi Hadith, actual in time, is because specifically with respect to commands and prohibitions. That commands and prohibitions, logically, it assumes a one that is being commanded and one that's being prohibited. And so they said that from that perspective, before we exist, there is a potential association of Kalaam, which is potential command and prohibition to creation. And that after we exist, there's an actual association of Kalaam, which is an actual command and prohibition to creation. Actual signification of commands and prohibitions. That's the only association of Kalaam that's Suluhi Qadim, Tanjizi Hadith. Vis-a-vis commands and prohibitions, vis-a-vis creation.
I'm just going to use an example. So he commands us to pray. Right? Isn't that timeless?
Right. So, you know, the some actually might have said that, but most of them say that the command to pray is, you know, Allah's knowledge of that command and Allah's will to command, that's timeless. But the actual signification of commanding is that association is when those commanded exist. And so in pre-eternity, it's a potential association. This is what they mention. Yeah. Cool. Inshallah.
Assalamu
Alaikum salam rahmatullah.
We have an online question. It's asked, Allah's qudra is related to everything possible and conceivable, but why is it not associated with all things necessary too?
MashaAllah. Yeah, it's a thing that a lot of people have trouble grasping. So, because you get logical absurdities, okay? So if you say, for example, that Allah's qudra is associated with things necessary, that means that Allah's qudra, based off of that, Allah's qudra would be associated with His own existence. Meaning that Allah could, if He wanted, cause Himself to stop existing. But we said that Allah's existence is what? Logically necessary. And so the logically necessary, by definition, must exist. It cannot not exist. And so you get into a pretty difficult situation logically. So that Allah Ta'ala therefore could cause Himself to non-exist. Allah could create a son for Himself. Allah could create a wife for Himself. Allah could make the creation divine. Allah could, suddenly all this is within His power, which is absurd. And actually, if you really reflect deeply, it's actually a praise to God that He is transcendent above logical absurdities. This is how you have to see it. That it's not limiting God to say He can only do the mumkinat. It's actually praising Allah and in His infinite transcendence that He is not associated with anything absurd. Even conceivably, He cannot be associated with anything absurd. Right? And that just the law of non-contradiction, that you cannot have necessary existence and possible existence. Right? That Allah Ta'ala's, because then if you open that door, okay, if someone wanted to say they're being sophistical basically, and they say no, the qudra is related to even the necessary. And so yeah, Allah, if He wanted, He could create a rock so heavy that He couldn't lift. And if He wanted, He could create His own non-existence. He could cease to exist. And He could make His creation Lord, and He becomes creator. A'udhu billah, hasha. If someone were to persist on that, which is the logical result of saying qudra is associated with the wajib, then there's no difference between saying God exists and God doesn't exist. And then when you say, are you a Muslim? He says, yes, I'm a Muslim. There's no difference between yes, I'm a Muslim and no, I'm not a Muslim. If you break the law of non-contradiction with respect to the divine, you break the law of non-contradiction everywhere. And so there is no meaning anymore. Every single factual statement can be inverted, you can just, this book is on the table, this book is not on the table. I'm sitting here, I'm not sitting here. This creation is created and it's not created. God is divine, He's not divine. You can just put a no on you can break the law, khalas. So what are you left with? You're left with absurdity. And, alhamdulillah, we're not absurd, and our Lord is not associated with anything absurd. I hope that clarifies why we say that qudra is only associated with the mumkin. Yeah, no, you've lost meaning, as we just said. And as a matter of fact, for those that say that they want to be sophistical and say God's power is associated with the logically necessary, then that's the same as saying it's not associated with the logically necessary. Because you've broken the law of non-contradiction. So you have no position. Does that make sense? It's, yeah, I think it makes sense. Makes sense to me. Alhamdulillah. Anything else? Mm. Sorry, I don't understand the question. But you want me to just go through it again? Okay. I think the best thing to do would just be review real quick. Okay. So, with respect to the associations of the 7 pre-eternal attributes, there is one attribute that has no association, which is what? Hayat, life, because it's a quote-unquote intrinsic attribute. So it's not associated to anything. There are 2 attributes that are associated with the mumkinat, logical possibilities, which are what? Irada and qudra, will and power. Okay. Now, for will, the association, it's an association of takhsis, of specification or determination, and there's 2 associations. There's saluhi qadim, pre-eternal potential, that what Allah could have chosen of all the logical possibilities, and then tanjizi qadim, pre-eternally what He did in fact choose. So the association of will that is pre-eternal yet actualized. Okay, and that's what is basically the qada according to the Asharis. The qada and qadr. The qada is the pre-eternal knowledge and determination of what will exist. For qudra, the associations are saluhi qadim, pre-eternal potential, that in pre-eternity what Allah could have created, and then tanjizi hadith, in time what Allah in fact does create. So the association of divine power, an association that's in time, and this is in each moment of existence. Everything that Allah creates in each moment of existence, and this is the qadr. Okay, this is the qadr, the unfolding of the qada in time. The unfolding of qada in time is the ta'alluq of qudra, which is tanjizi hadith. And this is what's understood, according to the Asharis, by the command kun in the Quran, the ontological command of be, that innama amruhu idha arada shay'an an yaqula lahu kun fayakun, that his matter is nothing but except that when He wills for a thing, he merely says to it kun, and then subsequently it comes into being. The kun there is understood by the Asharis as the in time actual association of qudra for each existent thing. And whereas, and these are called sifatul af'al, the attributes of action that are in the world. So giving sustenance, giving life, giving death, at each moment what occurs. That's irada, that's qudra. Tayyib. For there's 2 attributes that are associated with all 3 categories. Wajibat, logical necessities; mumkinat, logical possibilities; mustahilat, logical impossibilities. What are those 2 attributes? Ilm and Kalaam. And so everything that Allah knows, Allah speaks. Everything that Allah knows, Allah speaks. And the ta'alluq, the association of knowledge is only one ta'alluq, which is tanjizi qadim, okay, pre-eternal actual, that in timeless eternity, Allah actually knew everything, okay, because if you say potential or in time, either of those would imply a type of ignorance to the divine, which He is transcendent above. And then with Kalaam, we said that what He knows, He speaks, and so it's the ta'alluq is tanjizi qadim, pre-eternal actual, His signification or indication of all the wajibat, all the necessities, all the mumkinat, all the possibilities, all the mustahilat, all the impossibilities. However, with respect to addressing us, okay, actually addressing us, for example, commands and prohibitions, that we said that there is the saluhi qadim, the association of speech, which is pre-eternal potential before we exist, and then once we exist, the association tanjizi hadith, actual in time. Okay. And then the last category are attributes that are associated with the mawjudat, the attributes that are associated only with things that actually do exist, which are which attributes? Sama' and basar, hearing and sight, and that these two, that with, okay, so Allah Ta'ala hears and sees everything that exists. Okay, everything that exists includes the divine, His entity and attributes, and the non-divine, all of us, our entities and our attributes, and all of creation. So with respect to Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala, His entity and attributes, the association of His hearing and sight is tanjizi qadim, pre-eternal, outside of time, in pre-eternity and into eternity. Allah always hears and sees Himself, and hears and sees His attributes. So the association of that is tanjizi qadim, timeless, actual. Okay. With respect to creation, that which exists in creation, we are in time. And so the association before we exist is saluhi qadim, potential in timelessness, that He could have heard or seen us before we existed, had we existed. And then finally, tanjizi hadith, actual in-time association when we do exist, that Allah at every moment actually sees us and hears us, so the association is in time and actual. That's a summary of the ta'alluqat, inshallah. We're good to go? Good for the break? A lot of osmosis that can happen. We'll reunite, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, if Allah wills, and creates accordingly, in February. Naam. Anything else? طيب. Ask Allah Ta'ala to bless us all, give us tawfiq and ikhlas, dawam and ni'mah, continuous blessing and husn al-khitam, a beautiful end on La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad an-nabiyul ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah.